Welcome back to World News here on TVP World. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. Hundreds of thousands of mourners gathered in Rome for the funeral service of Pope Francis. The Pope was buried according to his wishes at the Basilica of St. Mary Major.
Visitors of the funeral service of Pope Francis, which included around 150 world leaders, heard a sermon about the issues Pope Francis was most vocal about.
His gestures and exhortations in favor of refugees and displaced persons are countless. His insistence on working on behalf of the poor was constant. He often used the image of the church as a field hospital after a battle in which many were wounded.
After the 2-hour ceremony, the coffin of Pope Francis was taken in a procession to the Basilica of St. Mary Major, 6 kilometers from St. Peter's Square. The special Pope Mobile, which offered a view of the coffin to the thousands of onlookers, drove past the Colosseum and across the Tiber River.
I was just saying that Pope Francis was an unbelievable man, and I don't know who will ever be able to replace him. And so it's a great loss, and it's very sad. On the other hand, he, I'm sure, is in a very, very good place.
We're not personally religious, however, we came here to obviously see the Pope go past. It is quite upsetting, obviously, because it's someone that you see on the news, you see him on media all the time. So yeah, it's quite an emotional thing, and it's amazing to see everyone come out and everyone clapping as he goes past. Yeah, it's amazing.
The pontiff is the first in over a century who was not put to rest at the St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Instead, Francis had requested a simple funeral at the church he was closest to, with a tomb only inscribed with his Latinized papal name, Franciscus, and a replica of his spectral cross hanging on the wall. The burial itself was closed to the general public. A group described by the Vatican as people in need were waiting for the coffin at the church entrance carrying white roses.
In the context of Pope Francis' funeral, a unique opportunity arose for the presidents of Ukraine and the United States to meet. After this conversation, Donald Trump expressed doubts about Russia's willingness to end the war in Ukraine. Following his meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Trump stated on social media that he fears Putin has been leading him around by nose. The American president met with Volodymyr Zelenskyy for a 15-minute conversation before the Pope's funeral. The White House has called this meeting very productive, while Zelenskyy himself said that it had the potential to become historic. After the conversation, Donald Trump took to social media to criticize Vladimir Putin. Trump not only questioned Putin's intentions, but also criticized Russia's attacks on civilians. The Trump-Zelenskyy meeting at the Vatican comes at a critical moment in negotiations aimed at ending the conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
There was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war, he's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions. Too many people are dying.
Vatican Gardens was a good venue for other world leaders to meet and discuss the prospects for lasting peace in Ukraine. During the commemorations, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, as well as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. After his meeting with Zelenskyy, the French president said that the pair had a very positive exchange of views. Macron went on to say that Zelenskyy reassured him of Ukraine's support for a proposal which would bring an unconditional ceasefire. Finally, the French president vowed that the coalition of the willing, led by France and Britain, will continue their efforts towards peace. The office of the British Prime Minister also reported that Starmer and Zelenskyy have agreed to continue the work to maintain positive momentum towards an end of the war with Russia. A group of Ukrainian partisans claims to have carried out a sabotage attack on the Russian-occupied region of Luhansk. The partisans say that they were able to disrupt the logistics of the occupation forces and cause delays in the supply of equipment and spare parts to the Russian army. The group has posted a series of images online which allegedly show a sabotage attack on a transformer box along a railway in the occupied Luhansk region. The Ukrainian saboteurs say that they are planning similar attacks on infrastructure in occupied parts of Ukraine. A number of people have been killed in Vancouver, Canada, after an individual in a car drove into a crowd at a street festival. The police have reported that the driver is currently in custody. So far, the authorities have not shared the exact number of victims. According to official statements, several people have been killed and multiple others wounded. The ramming took place as the Filipino community celebrating its holiday known as Lapu-Lapu Day. Following the attack, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney took to social media to write, quote, "I offer my deepest condolences to the loved ones of those killed and injured, to the Filipino-Canadian community and to everyone in Vancouver. We are all mourning with you," end of quote. A group of more than 30 MEPs, including several from Poland, wrote a letter to the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis demanding action over the Russian shadow fleet allegedly having the bulk of its operation come through Greece, including purchases of ships.
They're often moving in full sunlight, and yet they are dubbed a shadow fleet. Their cover comes not from the lack of sun, but rather from using shady tactics in order to avoid detection and legal consequences. Russia's infamous shadow fleet consists of old decommissioned vessels which circumvent Western sanctions in order to sell Russian oil and gas. But where are these ships purchased at? According to a group of more than 30 members of the European Parliament, Greece is one of the biggest culprits.
We were struck to learn that Greek owners are by far the largest sellers of ships for Russia's shadow fleet. According to a Brookings report based on Bloomberg data, 37% of the 75 Russian shadow fleet oil tankers sanctioned by the US in January 2025 were previously owned by Greek owners.
That's an excerpt from a letter sent by a cross-party group of MEPs from Lithuania, Poland, Germany, France, the Netherlands and more to the Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. The MEPs demand an explanation and concrete action to stop Greek businessmen from supporting the shadow fleet.
We still think that the Greek government could take more responsibility in preventing further sales of ships, but also in trying to track down the owners who did own the ships or still are involved possibly in the ownership or in the management of the ships. But it is a broader problem because governments still are too late and too weak in taking responsibility of preventing the circumvention of the sanctions that are still very important to keep the pressure on Russia.
The Greek government has so far responded through a spokesperson with a short statement.
The Greek authorities are doing everything to ensure compliance with the sanctions and to prevent any circumvention of the sanctions in their territory.
The shadow fleet has generated $9.4 billion of revenue for Russia in 2024 alone, according to the Kyiv School of Economics. These energy exports are not only fueling countries, but also the Russian war machine in Ukraine.
Official energy export is now sanctioned already for 3 years, and 3 years ago there was the idea that that would be actually lethal for Russia and that this would quickly end the war because Russia would run out of money. But then Russia found a way around these regulations.
The shadow fleet tankers can also be used to smuggle other goods, not just oil or gas. On Friday, the Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, seized a ship suspected of carrying Ukrainian grain stolen by Russia. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łyszak.
As Poland gears up for next month's presidential election, state officials voice increasing concerns over fake narratives and disinformation. Is Warsaw ready to push back against potential attempts to interfere with Poland's democratic process? Sasha Farbach reports.
Poland heads towards its crucial elections just a few weeks away. A familiar threat looms large: election interference. and the likely culprit, the Kremlin. Various nation-state actors, including Russia, Belarus, and China, are intensifying efforts to destabilize Poland's political landscape, with disinformation at the forefront. False narratives are spreading to create division and mistrust, turning the election into a battleground for truth. The Polish government is doing its utmost to prepare for any threats.
We have built an institutionally important project designed to ensure election security at various levels, such as protecting the IT systems of the National Electoral Office, countering disinformation, and informing candidates' election committees about incidents.
Amid recent disinformation campaigns on social media during Romania's elections and Russian interference in other elections across Europe, politicians and security officials remain on high alert to counter the Kremlin's tactics.
The Russian Federation trying to get access to the control system of a public service with whatever intention. I mean, it's the first time we observed it to this level. Besides the examples of major cyber attacks on political parties and companies of public transportation, those were all more or less next to the European elections.
As citizens and governments are stepping up, experts warn that social media platforms are dropping the ball when it comes to their responsibilities in tackling disinformation.
Primarily it's Russia, but then there is social media platforms. They are withdrawing from the tools that were previously developed and from practices on countering disinformation, so the situation is going to be even worse.
The challenge ahead is acute. According to a recent report in Poland, it highlights a shift in how people access information. 81% of respondents acknowledge a surge in online disinformation over the past decade. Surprisingly, 35% of Poles now rely on alternative sources for news, while nearly half, around 46%, turn to social media as their main source for breaking news. Experts warn that although much is being done to counter disinformation,
we saw some, for example, fake accounts of Polish candidates, and we were able to remove them.
Nation-state actors and false narratives will continue in the near future.
We saw, for example, not directed to the Polish infosphere, but to English-speaking audiences, content pieces that were pretending to be media outlets, for example, Polish media outlets, but not only, also CNN, that were spreading false information about potential terrorist threats in Poland, and that would lead, falsely obviously, to postponing the elections. I would expect these disinformation threat actors to be more present and more active 2 weeks before elections.
As Poland stays alert and its government works to safeguard the election process, citizens must also stay cautious. Russia and other nations will continue to target our digital hearts and minds in their efforts to influence the outcome. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
The first 3 days of exhumations of victims from World War II era massacres in former Polish areas of western Ukraine have not yet resulted in findings of human remains. The work is being obstructed by plant and tree growth on the site of a former Polish village Puzniki in Ukraine's Ternopil region. According to reports, an estimated 50 to 120 Poles from the no longer existing village of Puzniki were murdered by Ukrainian nationalists in 1945. So far, however, no remains have been found. The team will limit its work on Sunday to documentation and archiving due to a Ukrainian religious holiday. The murders were part of the Volhynian Galician massacres, during which large-scale ethnic cleansings were conducted by Ukrainian extremists against Poles during the war. Poland has long insisted on the exhumations of the mass graves in order to identify and rebury the remains of the victims. The exhumations started on Thursday and are carried out by a mixed Ukrainian-Polish team. And that concludes this edition of World News, but please stay tuned to TVP World for more coverage.